Hi everyone, and welcome back to Dev Superpowers webinar series. My name is Danijel Malik and I'll be your host for tonight. So this is the first episode in the new year and we're gonna kick it off with Azure API Management. So what Azure API Management actually is? Well, nowadays you will see that a lot of companies, and that means a lot, might be including you as well, are building a lot of backend services, and in today's mobile first, cloud first world, this is pretty much a must. So if you're building a backend service, you're probably thinking about how consumers are actually going to use it, and you might think about setting up some quotas and caching, or maybe put on enhanced security and things like that. Now the problem is, if you have an existing API that has been there for a while, you probably can do that easily without refactoring the code. And in such a case, you'll probably start looking about getting an API gateway in front of you, and Azure API Management is exactly that. So it serves as a gateway and it does all that security, caching, and a bunch of other rules for you, so that you can actually hide your existing API behind a gateway and kind of provide a front door for your consumers to use it. It's more like building an API facade for existing backend services. Of course, you can add new capabilities like I mentioned before, caching and other things. But Azure API Management is not just a gateway. As an API builder, you would probably think of, okay, yeah, I have a gateway, but how can I publish things, and how can I control them? So Azure API Management gives you a publisher portal where you can do all this, what you would normally expect from any API gateway. Of course, it's kind of quite friendly for developers as well. So developers will try to build their apps, and what's the beauty here with Azure API Management is that they can register separately, and they're gonna get their own pairs of keys which they can use to build their apps. So once they have the apps, in their apps they'll have to consume keys to connect to the API gateway, and the API gateway will pretty much serve you as a proxy or as another filter before they hit your backend service. Of course, they might never even know what's actually in the back. You can control that bit, you can kind of reveal what API is being in the back, but probably that's not the purpose of this. Okay, so this is the only slide that I have. I'm gonna jump to demos. I have a lot of things to show, so let's better get going. Okay, so when you go to Azure, and you click on new, you can go to app services, and down here you'll find API management. You click create, you type in the URL you want to have, whatever it's going to be. Proceed to the next page. Well, let's put in something for now, and then it's going to verify if this domain is still available. Then I put in organization name and who's going to be administrator. In advanced settings you can choose what plan you want to use, so whether it's developer, premium, or whatever plan you want to use. The whole creation of the API takes quite a long time. I would say it's roughly about 30 minutes, so I'm not gonna do that. I have prepared one up front, and this is the view that you would get once the API is created. Now you don't have to do much from here, because you have to click on this link manage, and when you click on that link manage, it's gonna take you to a dashboard like this. So this is the admin phase of the Azure API Management, and once you get a dashboard, you would see what products you have here and what applications. Now let's stop here for a minute. So products, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually offering specific products. You don't have to go down to microservices architecture, you don't have to build your own APIs. You can do a mashup of both if you like. So products are something that you're actually offering to your consumers, and a product might be like a free trial of your API. So you set a quota on a specific product that they can only call your API 10 times per minute, or they can transfer like 200 megs of data per week, or things like that. And it can be done on a specific set of keys, so it can be done for the entire group. So say you want to limit your consumers who are using free trial, so that all together can only use like a few calls per second, or you can do it per specific developer or specific group. But anyway, so products will be like a bunch of groups where you set up specific policies on how that API or group of APIs will be consumed. Now on the other hand, you have applications, and applications are, as you could probably expect, apps that are built by developers, and they are submitted to your developer portal. So if I go here and open a developer portal, this is what I'm gonna get. So it's a pretty nice page. It's built on top of Orchard. So if you're familiar with Orchard CMS, you'll you'll recognize it straight away. But more than that, what's important here, I can see APIs that are created. Now I don't have any, and I have two products, but they don't have any APIs, so we have to do that bit first. So as you can see here, I have a starter, which is predefined one. So once you create an Azure API Management app in Windows Azure, it's gonna create starter and unlimited product for you with predefined policies. So in this one it says, okay, 5 calls per minute or maximum calls 100 per week. Anyway, so applications, you would see this is like a gallery of apps that are built on top of your APIs. If developers want to submit them, they could, your consumers could be actually able to see them and download them, or do a bunch of other things. More or less it serves just like a portfolio, nothing else. Anyway, back to this screen. So what I can do from here, I can say, okay, I'm gonna add an API, and I can just start typing, what it's gonna be my API name. So this is gonna be product, and I could provide a URL if I had one. Then I have to choose what will be the URL suffix. And in the URL suffix, I could just go product. You can see that it immediately adds something at the back here. So this is your primary domain, and after that, every API that you add will have a suffix, and you decide what exactly it's going to be. And then of course you can add this API to a specific product. Now before we do that, let's go in Visual Studio and build an API. And later we're gonna add it. So I don't have an existing one, but I'm gonna add it now. Okay, so here I already have one API, and I'm gonna publish to Windows Azure, and then I'm gonna reuse it. So it doesn't do anything specific. Everything's happening in the session, so I'm caching some things. If I run this guy, it automatically goes to Swagger. You can see, it's pretty net. I can try it out. It does return some response. So if I go and create a rule, it's gonna create one, and now if I click on get, it's gonna return that. You get the idea. It's not anything spectacular, but it's gonna serve the purpose. Okay, so what I can do from here, I can go on and publish this to Azure. By the way, this is Azure API app. So if you go here under project and you create a new one and you choose this, I chose that one, Azure API app. It's pretty handy because it's very clean, and it provides just the necessary bits plus a bit of Swagger. Packages are included and things like that. Anyway, it closed my solution. Great. So let me just go back to my API management. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna right click and publish, not this one here, and from here this thing is busted in update 1. So if I choose that one, it's gonna freeze Visual Studio, so I'm gonna skip it, and I'm gonna proceed with the default one, well, the classic one, Microsoft Azure API apps. And from here I can say, okay, you can automatically generate the metadata, or I could provide a Swagger metadata file, or I can just choose no metadata. So from here on, we're just going to go okay, it wasn't able to add the SDK, but that's fine. I'm gonna skip this. And here what I see, it's gonna ask me to which subscription I want to add it, and I'm gonna choose my MVP, and then we're gonna just create a new API app. So I'll have to do that again. Well, on that screen I could just see, you know, which apps I have there, so nothing really spectacular. So I'm gonna create a new app. That's fine. So this is my subscription, and this is the service plan I'm using, so that's all good. I'm gonna click create. And now it's preparing the infrastructure in the back to publish my API, so it's gonna take a minute. Oops, that's bad. The good thing is that I have seen this before, and what I have to do, obviously there is something wrong with Azure, because if you look at stack trace, it tells you it's like bad request somewhere for some reason. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is to switch to Azure, and I'm gonna create that API from here. So if I go here, I'm interested in API app, I have to wait for the search to show up, and then I'll choose this one, and I'm gonna try create. Let's see how lucky I am with code Auditor. Oh nice, it's free. So I'm gonna click create, and now it's preparing the infrastructure in the back. This time it's running on Azure rather than in Visual Studio, but that doesn't really matter. So once the app is ready, and it'll take some time, I'm just gonna import the publish profile here, but I have to wait first. So once the app is actually published, and it will take about a minute before we get there, once the app is published, and it will take about a minute before we get there, I want to show you how we'll actually get that API in our API management. So instead of choosing the add API, I'm going to import the API, because it'll be much faster. Otherwise I would have to define every single endpoint from that API here. Well, not here, I would define the API, but when I would click through, I would have to define the operations, which is not what I really want. So you can import the API if you have WDL, or if you have Swagger. You can go from clipboard, you can go from file if you can upload one, or you can actually pull it down from the URLs. And I'll be interested in Swagger because I already have Swagger there, so I'm just gonna reuse what I have. Let me just check if my app is there, and it's ready. Okay, good. So you can see that my API app is there. I'm gonna download the publish profile. Showing folder. Let me copy the path, and what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna publish, but this time I'm gonna use import from the file. That's it. Let me just publish this. Now this will take about a minute before it publishes the file and makes sure that my app is up and running. So once I have the application running on ssw.codeauditor.azurewebsites.net, it's gonna run like a regular API app. You're gonna see the default screen, but I'll be able to access my Swagger site as well, which means that I can pull the Swagger information from there. So let's give it just a minute. It's loading the files, so I assume if I would go to ssw code auditor Azure websites, it should be okay. That's a good thing, even though if it's a yellow screen of that means we just don't have everything there yet, but it's on its way. So 1, 2, 3, 4, here we go. So the site is loading now, and you can see that default screen doesn't really matter. So I'm just gonna go back to my previous screen. I'm gonna type in Swagger, and voila. So here is my API. I could try to run it from here. You'd see that it works, and if I post something here, it's not really any different. You know, everything is there and it's working. But what I'm really interested in is this URL, because if I copy this URL in my browser, it's gonna provide me my Swagger information. And now we come back to the API management here, and if I paste that in, and if I go, okay, I want it to be called Auditor. I'm gonna include it in my starter product, and it can be in the unlimited one as well, doesn't really matter. When I save this, it's gonna pull down the Swagger information for that one, and you'll see that all operations here will be imported by default. So I have post, I have delete, I have two gets. So one is get rule by ID, the other one is get all rules, which is pretty cool. So right now I have an API there in my API gateway, and I could start playing with it. And if I click on one of these guys, it's gonna provide me the definition of how actually the operation works. I could set up caching here. I could just enable it and say, okay, I want to cache this request. If I had parameters there in that method, maybe this one isn't the best candidate because it's create rule by ID, and I don't have any query parameters, but I do have a body one. Surprisingly, it doesn't come up. Probably because my Swagger documentation wasn't really good. Anyway, but I could define manually things if I wanted here. Now for the other things, yeah, I don't care about changes. I could specify specific security. So right now, if I want to use this API, I don't ask for any specific credentials, but I could do that too, and user authorization could be done using OAuth, and I could define my own server and things like that. No any open issues, that's one thing you can actually do, but people can report issues against your API. So if you're interested in backtracking and how things go, that's just one of the possibilities you could have. And the last thing is the products tab, where I can see under which product my API is actually listed. Okay, so this is now published. So if I switch back to the developer side, if I go to APIs, I could already see that API, and if I click on it, that's where the things start to become really nice, because I could get the entire specification on how the API is built, and what's even better, if I go here down at the bottom of the page, you can see code samples, and you get a curl and you get a C#. You can actually copy this code out, paste it in your application, or if you start a new application, and it's gonna work. So it's gonna actually create a request, do whatever you would normally do through the console here. So if you click on try it, you can actually launch the console, and it supports various languages, so you can get Java, JavaScript, and so forth. But if you want to do it from the web, you can go on try it, and now this is going to bring up the console. So you can already see it's, you know, warning me that I don't have access to this API because I haven't subscribed to it yet, because this API is already part of a product. So if you remember here, it belongs to starter and belongs to unlimited. And if I click on starter, you will see that this product actually has a setting where it says require subscription. Now that's one bit that it's worth of talking. So in API management, you can actually require that people subscribe to your API before they can use it, and it's gonna issue shared signature token that has to be passed in the header. Otherwise it's gonna reject. So the API gateway is gonna reject calls from client who don't provide the shared signature. And if I turn that off, that's just for testing purposes, and refresh this page, this message should go away. But let's see how that goes. Maybe because the other one requires that too. So let me see if I remove it. API. So let me just remove it from the other product for now. Yep, that's it. Let's try again. There we go. So this is the create rule. Maybe that's not the best one, but still. So as you can see, it already comes up with something like a request URL, which is pretty funny. You know, I added my code auditor at the back as a product, and this is what it's coming up from my Swagger notification. So the URL itself is not really nice, and we'll see later how we can actually change this and make it much better. But for now, it's pretty clumsy, you know. Code auditor /API /v1 code auditor /rules. So the UI itself here is not really the best thing you can get. So I'm gonna switch back for a moment to my Swagger, and I'm gonna create, or actually I have something there. So is that developer? So if I go here and say get rules, and if I send that, I should get back what was already posted there. So yay, we have one rule in there, which is pretty cool. Now if you try to type that in manually in your browser, it should work exactly the same. So I'm getting something back. I could actually see, let me just try that again. In network, what are the headers that are coming back? So it's pretty cool, you know. You get all the things you would expect from the API gateway. Now if I go back to my subscriptions, and I'll turn that on so that people have to subscribe to my API before they can actually call it. Visibility. This is just, you know, if you have multiple products, you can specify which groups can see it. By default, you have 3 different groups. It's admins, devs, and guests. So this is visible to everyone right now because guest is the most public level anyway. So what I'm gonna do, I wanna turn on the subscription now, and I'm just gonna turn that checkbox off for now. So if I require a subscription, I can specify a couple of options. So a subscription probably has to be approved first before people can start using it, and there are a couple of things like people can subscribe to the same API multiple times, which is something I don't want. If I turn just the basic require subscription for now, and I'm gonna try this again from the browser, I already get a 401 message. So that's how the API gateway is actually preventing the users to jump on my API. Now one of the interesting things, I'm gonna turn off the subscription for now again, is let's try to make this request a few more times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here it comes. You can see that the rate limit has been exceeded, and if I try that again, it's gonna tell me, okay, try again in 48 seconds, and it's gonna do the throttling for me. So that's one of the nicest things about the API gateways. And let's see how this is actually configured here. So another thing down here is policies, and I can define a policy on a different scope. So it can be across all products, it can be across all APIs, or it can be across all operations, and I can just define a different policies here. And you will see that one of the policies that's defined globally, so this is just across everything, is that I have removed the proxy outgoing new URL. And there is another one ASP.NET version, so I don't want to reveal headers that are being returned from my API, and I don't want to set any cookies and things like that. So whatever goes to my real API, I want to just hide all that, because I don't want people to start abusing it, and I want to utilize the API gateway to maximum as I can. So this is just one of the things that's pretty handy. You have a bunch of policies here. So if I go full screen, this is the list of things you can set. Some of them can go to inbound section, some just belong to backend. So in this case, more or less every single one will have this forward request. But if you want to read more about policies, this is the URL where you get all the policies. They're explained in details how you can use them. But what is really nice, you can actually set up policy expressions. So if you want to play with C# 6 features, you could do things like this, in the policy. So literally, you're actually entering the C# code inside of the XML file. So let me just see if there are some examples that are pretty cool. Or is that the only one? Yeah, that's the only one. But you get an idea, you get ton of variables at disposal. You can go through this and you can see exactly what's the structure. So you get a context and you can play with that one. I won't dive into details of this thing, but it's pretty cool what you can actually do. So this is the link to the policies, and this is the link to the policy expression usages. So if you want to check it for yourself. Okay, back to our policies here. So you can see that this is the global policy. So whatever is coming from my APIs, regardless of where they are and under which product they are located, I want them to remove those headers no matter what. But if I switch to my starter, you will see that starter has a different policy, and in that one it defines, okay, this is the rate limit. Let me just click on configure. So this is the rate limit. I want you to do 5 calls, and the renewal period is 60 seconds. That means that I can only do 5 calls in 60 seconds, and then it's gonna return the 429 error code. And if I was, keep pushing, I could exceed, 100 calls in a week. That's just something I can control. So if I want to control this even further, I could say, okay, where is that one now? Limit call rate per key, and I could just say, okay, which keys would get specific ones. And here's where I was saying you can do expressions like this in code, and then you can start playing with things. So that's a separate topic. I won't dive into details, but you get an idea. Now, one of the other things that's really nice, if I go to one of the operations, and let me just modify an existing operation here on the API. So let's say I want to say get rules, and my get rules has a pretty ugly URL. So I want it to go down to this one, but what I really care about is that it should go to rules like this. And I can do a rewrite URL template, and if I had a parameter here like ID, that would be rewritten properly back to my backend service. So as for this one, I'll just remove it, and if I change it, say save. So this is now, instead of going to the full URL here, it's gonna go to code auditor /rules, and this should be fine. So let me see the summary. If I copy this and go /rules, yep, you can see it gives me back the list of rules. So I have successfully overridden the URL template of my operation, but it still goes to the proper backend. Now the only problem is if I want to do that for every single method, and if my API doesn't have only 4 or 5, it's gonna be very painful. So I'll show you later how you can actually do this better. But what I want to show you right now, what actually happened in the back is that Azure API, well, the UI app you see here, created a policy on the API method. So if I switch to this one, you can see that in a black square. That means that this operation has a policy that has been defined for it. And here it comes, my rewrite URI template, and it's gonna change it to whatever I want. So this is how it works. Now the next demo I want to show you, I actually have I have created a new API, which would be another one that I would port and add it, but since we had some issues in the beginning, I don't want to go through this whole thing, but just keep in mind that for the next few demos you're gonna see TimePro there, but it's not gonna do anything at all. So for this one I'll skip it. So I'll go to demo 3, and what I want to show you actually is let me close this. Oh, okay, so let me undo my changes for now. Get is quite handy for demonstration because you can write all code up front, and then you can just create branches from that and mark them as demos. So it's pretty cool. Okay, so what I have right now is still the same app, but I made it look a little bit nicer, and I added some comments here in code, so you can see, you know, let me just switch back for a second to my API. We don't need this. Let me just get rid of some clutter. So as you can see here, you know, those names are not really handy. I don't get any information on what are the response codes and things like that. So what I ended up doing is I modified my code, I added some XML comments, and here I have some response codes, and I could actually define another thing like response type. So if I go response type and I go type of, this will be, I think it's a collection of rule. This would appear there in the UI as well. So let me show this to you in Swagger first. So if I go to rules now and go to get, probably have to build it again. Yep, but you can see that status code here. So this is a default one, but you can see other response messages. So this one by default is 200, but for update it should come up with something else. Let me just see if, so this is create, update has 204. Oh, this one shouldn't be because it doesn't return anything. So okay, so the status code here should be actually 204, because when I'm updating I'm not returning any content at all in this case. So you can see that all those statuses, so if I change the XML comment, it's gonna appear here, and I could actually, you know, define what's the model schema. So right now I don't have anything. As soon as I put that response type up here, and I go like this, response type, type of rule, let's build that again, refresh my Swagger, and voila, suddenly it knows what's my model and how it's gonna work. So it's pretty cool. Now why I'm showing you this is because you want to expose this information to the API gateway, and the better the documentation you generate, the easier it is for your users to consume it. Now keep in mind that the API gateway is actually like a front door to your all APIs that you're going to provide, and people will probably need plenty of documentation on how to use it, and these are just little tricks you can use to generate it. Now what I actually did is here in the app start Swagger config, and you can get that Swagger config by default when you create an Azure API app. I just modified it a little bit. So first thing I did is that I put in Swagger document filter, and this is just gonna do a little magic down there, and there's another one, Swagger operation filter. Why I'm showing you this is in this controller I, let's say, abused the display name attribute, which normally go on the model, but it serves the purpose. How I want to name this method, and I could say, okay, put or let's say update rule, and this is how that method would appear in the Swagger documentation. So if I refresh this, you can see that this was rules put. Now if I go back to this one, didn't refresh yet. Let me try again. You can see that this is now update rule. It has a different name, and what it actually does, it changes the operation name in the back. So the Swagger config here, it looks for different things, and if the method isn't named properly, it's gonna go through, give it some name, pass some parameters and things like that. And there's the other one that's really important, the Swagger document filter. Now if you remember, when I was showing you different methods here, they had this problematic API v1 called Auditor rules. Now I can control that bit, and I can set up base path of my API, and once I do that, I actually strip off whatever is after that, and this is going to be treated as base. So when I import everything to Azure API, it's no longer going to follow that long pattern. It's going to be pretty much nicer syntax. So let me publish this guy again. And let's go. So hopefully this time it will be faster. Yep. So if I refresh this UI now, you can see that that I don't have anything defined right now here. That's still the old Swagger that you have seen in first place. So once I refresh my Swagger, you can see that in the rules section I get a model now. Same thing for post. You can see the description is coming in, and status codes are defined down here, and what is the response type, and all sort of things. Plus you can see that the base is right now, let me just collapse, so that the base URL has been set, and consequently the path for rules and all that has been shrink down to the bare minimum. So what I want to do now is I want to copy this again to my Azure API Management, and I want to update my API. So I'm going to go here to Code Auditor. Oops, I have to go to Import. Let me just choose the existing one from URL. So I'll update my API using the new Swagger definition. Gonna click Save, and this time I'm gonna update the so the API endpoint has been updated in my Azure Management API. And if I refresh this page, you can see that endpoints have been updated with the descriptions that I provided in the new Swagger. So this one is update rule, and this one is get by ID. So you get an idea where this is actually going. But the problem is, if I would have to do this every single time when I published my API, it would be very time consuming, plus I would say a bit fragile. So if you're using tools for automated deployments like Octopus Deploy, release management for TFS, Chef, doesn't really matter, you would probably want to have this bit automated. So once you push your API to production, you would probably want to update the API itself. So this is feasible, and you can do it if you go to security. There is a section where you can enable API management, REST API, which means that you can call the API management API to update whatever is happening here on the gateway. So what you'll need is actually, well, here's the thing: you can generate the security token. That's one bit that you'll need, apart from a few others. But the security token can actually be generated. You can generate it through the UI here on the page, or you can generate it manually, but then you need the identifier and the primary key. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to generate it from here. So I'm going to copy this signature, and I have actually created a method down here, and here I just need to copy this signature, and I have to tell him, okay, I'm going to take a step back. So Azure API Management API, it's a bit weird how it sounds, but anyway, provides me an option to execute an update method on the API itself. Let me see if I can bring it up. Azure API Management REST API. You have a lot of documentation about Azure API Management, so you can use it if you want to. And here you can actually call update. Okay, let's try put, maybe import. Nope. Oh, I have to go to API, and here I can go import, update an API via import. And you can read the docs how you actually have to pass in the details, what exactly you have to provide. But I've created a PowerShell script that does all that for you. So literally what I need to know is what is the URL of your API management. So in my case this is dev superpowers, and then it goes by default management.azureapi.net. You have to provide the API ID. I think I didn't copy the right ID from here. So be careful when you're copying this. The API ID is not this identifier, but you have to go to the right API and copy this from the URL. So this is the API ID. That's the one you have to provide. And then what suffix you want to have. So if we take a few steps back, at the beginning I had to define what will be the suffix of my API. So I think I did it before like this. It was code auditor or /code auditor, doesn't really matter. Now I want to change this a little bit, just to show you that you can update the suffix as well. But there is a little catch. While I was playing with the API management, I realized that the API suffix doesn't get updated just with a single request. So when you do put, it's not gonna update it. You have to call patch, which is the second method. So you have two different ones. So this is one, which is put, and this is gonna update all information, but it's not gonna change the API suffix. So you have another one which is called update an API, and respectively this one will actually update the API name. So you have to call patch as well. That's why I have two different requests. So this is my API suffix, and the last thing that I'll need is where is my Swagger doc. So it's gonna pull it down from my uploaded application, and fingers crossed if I run this it should work. So let me just say this. I want to open this in PowerShell ISE. All saved? No. Let me reopen that again. So if I run it, okay, let's try it the other way. So if I go to this guy, run PowerShell, now edit. So let's see what happens. So if everything is fine, this will update my API. There it comes. We have 2 responses coming back from the web, so both of them are 204, so no content. But if I go back to my API, so far it was Code Auditor. Now if I hit refresh, it should be /API/v1/Code Auditor. There we go. So you can see that I updated the API on the API management using the REST API. So simply now I have Code Auditor. If I wanted to change, that would be fine. All operations have been updated and so forth. So it's pretty cool, because right now I can automate this bit and update my API's definition on the fly. Okay, so you have seen pretty much the entire life cycle, how I'd actually start using that API management as a publisher. But now let's see how this is actually working from the consumer point of view as a developer. So as a developer, I have to have a subscription unless the product is free to use, which in this case it is, but I'm gonna lock it back to a subscription again. So let's just change the visibility, settings, require subscription, save it. And if I was to create a new product, I could easily do so, but for now I'm just gonna keep using the existing ones. Now as a developer, if I go to products, I will have that starter, and I'm not subscribed to anything yet, but I will have to in order to use it. I can click on confirm, and that's gonna create a subscription to this product. So once I do that, I will get the UI here like this, and I get keys, so I get primary and secondary key. So now I can actually start using this subscription. So let me just switch back, or create actually a new tab. I want to go to this API, and I'm gonna use that functionality to get. And this is the beauty of the console that I've showed you before. Let me just copy this bit down here, and what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create a new console application here. Let me just stick that in, see how it goes. So query string is fine. What I have to do here is just I have to replace that subscription key. So in my case, if I go here, I can use this subscription key, and then it should be good. Let me just write console write line. Let's just print out what's in the response. Content. Yep, that'll be fine. Now if I run this, it should come up with something. Well, string content, great. Read as string async results. Not the nicest way, but still. Ooh. So let me try something else. Let me just post one rule here. Yep, we have it there. Try this, okay. So if I run this app again, oh, it doesn't like it. Let me put in a breakpoint and see what do I get here in the response. 404. Oh, let's just try rules like this without query string. Make this again. Yeah. So the reason why that happened is that remember when I was actually updating the API using PowerShell, it doesn't override the policies. So the policy is still there, and that's the rewrite URL policy. So if I go here, come on, pick it up. Not for this one. We still have a policy on this method. We haven't removed it, so I have to delete this policy if I wanna configure policy. Let me just delete that, save it, delete, here it is. And now if I want to go back to that one, it should work just fine. So yeah, here comes list of all rules that we have on that URL. If I wanted to create a new one, I intentionally use Swagger here because it's just a single click and I could just type in something I wanted. It's just easier because of the UI I have there. But I could paste and create a rule, but you get an idea where this is going. So as a consumer, pretty much I have everything simplified. All I have to do is I have to provide this OCP APIM subscription key in the request header, and then it's gonna let me through. So if I skip that one, I'm gonna get 401 immediately, so you can see how it works. But apart from that, really cool thing is that you get it here. So now when I have my app ready, I could actually register that application and show it on the portal. So this is how I do it. I can actually go here, register an application, and I say demo code auditor or code auditor console, description runs just in console, requirements, I don't know, .NET framework. You get an idea. Now the funny thing is that you get this category list, which is not very descriptive. So in this case I would probably go with productivity, but then again, unless you're actually building an API that does any of this, it's not very friendly. So in this case I would go like http codeauditor.com. I think that's the URL. So you can give it a try. This is our app that we're actually building. It's a code auditor. Does scan your code and does a bunch of things. But anyway, once I do that, I can save this. Later I can come back and say, okay, I want to maybe add a screenshot or change this framework. Now I'm happy, and after I'm happy with this, I can actually submit this for review. And once I do that, I will see that somewhere down here under applications, and you can see submitted applications. So developers can submit their apps and they will appear here, and then as an admin I can go through every single one. I can decide, okay, whether I'm happy with it or not. I can read this, okay, it's not very much, but still I'm gonna publish it, and after I publish it, it's gonna appear here under applications. You can see code auditor console, you get the description. For some reason the links don't appear here, so it might be a bug in the API portal, but you get the idea. I can also take it away, so once I do that, it's gonna disappear from this screen. So you see the page doesn't exist anymore, even though the app was there. I cannot delete it as an admin, so I can only decide I'm not gonna publish it. But then as a user, where is that URL? I can go back to applications. Why I don't see it for me now? Let me change that profile. Yep. So you can see that this is not published anymore, and I can decide whether I want to resubmit that or whether I want to remove it. And then now I just removed it. A couple of other things that are really cool. You can get analytics reports based on how much you're actually using the API during which hours and things like that. So you can see which subscriptions you're using and things like that. So you get full analytics. It's pretty good. As an admin, you get that as well, because you're gonna be charged based on the usage. So it's better. You better keep an eye on that. But I think that the price is not too high considering the value you get. Anyway, what are other things you can do here? So apart from the analytics, which you can see here, it's just that this is on the global level, so which developer actually made the most calls, how much bandwidth they used, and things like that, which products. So a bit more detailed view. You can control the users, so once they register you can actually control in which group they belong to and what access they will have. You can actually invite the user. The other thing is that if you want to charge for your subscriptions to your APIs, you can do that as well. So under security you can actually have that delegation, and then you can delegate your users to a third site, not necessarily to register inside your portal, and then you can actually charge them for subscriptions and bring them back, and then just give them proper subscriptions based on how much they have paid and things like that. If you want to make the portal, the developer portal, a bit nicer, you can play with that too. So the site, as I mentioned before, is built on orchard. So when you go to content, you're gonna see this pages here. You can modify it as much as you want. So in this case, maybe I don't like the color up there, and I don't know, let's make something here, the H3 style color, maybe it's gonna be crimson. So publish now, and now if I refresh this, you can see that the color here is different. So this is just one page. You can see the entire layout on the I think it's here on the widgets. Yeah, so you can see what's the structure. So basically that banner that you're seeing here at the top, I'm gonna change this color too as well, so it's gonna be crimson. Save. So this one doesn't have publish because it's not a website, but anyway, now we're getting in orchard. But yeah, you can modify everything you want here if you want to make it a bit nicer. But yeah, so a quick recap what we actually have seen today. So Azure API Management gives you a lot of capabilities in terms of what you're gonna do with your API. So it's more or less a front door for everything that your company has built. All APIs, you can put them up here, and you can actually control how they're being used in terms of quota, security, and things like that. So you can completely automate the way the API is actually published there. You can set up the portal behind it. Actually, you can put it behind a custom domain, so you're not necessarily forced to use this address. That's the bit that I haven't showed you, but as you would expect, you can configure this and you could put it under a custom domain. So I could type in something like api.danielmalik.com, and if I provide a sufficient certificate, this should actually work. I haven't done that because I would have to create a certificate for this site, but you get an idea. So this is everything around Azure API Management. Hope you had good fun and see you next time. Thanks.